Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Chairman of the Parliament, Mr. Hamerberg, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to greet you at this important conference dedicated to the development of a human rights strategy and action plan by the Government of Georgia. In supporting this conference, the European Union delegation and the United Nations Development Programme with the Office of the United Nations High Commission of Human Rights recognize the importance of elaborating a strategy which reflects the government and its constituents' vision, attitude, and actions directed towards the protection and the promotion of human rights in Georgia. This year, the United Nations celebrates the 20-year anniversary since the adoption of its own Human Rights Action Plan with the Vienna Declaration in 1993. This Declaration Action Plan led to historic advances in the promotion and the protection of human rights universally. And we remain convinced that the Human Rights Strategy and Action Plan currently being developed by the government here will play the same important role for the protection and the promotion of human rights in Georgia. The government has very appropriately expressed its political will to tackle existing human rights challenges, and we are very pleased to note that the process is quite advanced already. The springboard for developing a human rights strategy and action plan has already been created. The major tendencies, achievements, and problems have already been identified, thanks to a great extent to the remarkable work done in the last several months by the former Council of Europe Human Rights Commissioner, Mr. Thomas Hamerberg, who now acts as the European Union Special Advisor on Constitutional and Legal Reform and Human Rights in Georgia. It is our expectation that the strategy and action plan will provide a clear vision of the ways to address human rights issues, but we would also expect that these documents will set short and longer-term priorities and specify the implementation mechanisms for enacting these, including the allocation of necessary financial resources. Moreover, we see the process of strategy development to be open and participatory, bringing the government, parliament, civil society, international partners, and national human rights institutions together productively. Human rights is an overarching issue which goes beyond individual players or institutions. Interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible, human rights lay the foundation for development and progress for the well-being of each and every citizen. As it is now 20 years since Georgia became a member of the United Nations, and indeed 20 years that the United Nations has been in Georgia, I would like to remind you again of the Charter of the United Nations, which calls for all of us to ensure respect for fundamental human rights, but also to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. Indeed, the premise laid down under the auspices of the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan in a report entitled In Larger Freedom says unambiguously that security, development, and human rights are inextricably linked. Respect for human rights is an inalienable part of human development. Therefore, on behalf of the United Nations, once again, I would like to express our appreciation for the government's work in addressing the human rights challenges in Georgia. Good strategy is a prerequisite of successful implementation. So I look forward to a valuable conference today and a conclusion to the hard work already underway on the strategy and plan. And in closing, let me once again reiterate our readiness to support the development of human rights strategy and implementation in every way possible. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
And thanks to the Prime Minister and to the Chair of the Parliament and to the new United Nations Resident Coordinator here for your kind and encouraging words. Let me say from the outside that an observer coming from other countries, from the outside, to observe a situation in a country has to be humble. It's not possible for anyone outside to really understand the situation in the country. And it's absolutely important that anyone who tries to do this has a humble approach and a self-critical approach. I think self-criticism is actually the key word in the work for human rights. And when I'm asked by various people that how I evaluate a country or a government or compare with other countries and governments, I would say I abstain from comparisons, because it's not possible really to understand the situation in each country. But one thing that is crucial is whether there is in the government an element of self-criticism, an openness for the fact that changes can always be made. We are never through when it comes to implementation of human rights. There could always be improvement. And I think that self-critical approach also goes for the outsiders coming from United Nations, European Union, Council of Europe and others, that we have to be open-minded and self-critical in our assessments. Having said that, I do think that there may be some value in having people coming from outside with somewhat fresh eyes, because if you're inside, there is always a risk that you come too close to the problems and may not completely see the overall situation because you are so deep into the concrete daily problems. So I think the combination of some observations from outside with a concrete discussion inside on what one could do in order to improve is a good combination. And that's why I think that the international agencies here have a role to play if we are humble and self-critical in our approach. When doing this report, I of course had to look backwards and see what had happened and what the situation was. And when doing that, I read quite a number of reports from international observers. And what I noticed was that these reports were quite similar to the reports of bodies inside the country. I'm thinking about reports from the public defender, and I'm thinking about the reports by established non-governmental human rights bodies. And the picture that emerged was that there were some systemic problems, even in the very system of justice. That there was a problem about what we call equality of arms in the judicial procedures, the balance between the authority and power, in reality, of the prosecutors compared to the possibilities of the defense in the judicial proceedings. That's a major problem. It's clear also that there has been a misuse of the system of plea bargaining, where prisoners were faced with unfair choices between a very long sentence or to admit, perhaps even when they were confess, perhaps even when they were innocent, and perhaps had to pay money in order to have a reduction of the sentence. This was a misuse of the plea bargaining system, which obviously did take place here. There were also reports about really bad prison conditions, overcrowding, bad health care, and also violence in the prisons. And of course, these problems have to be recognized and to be addressed. And that's one major aspect of the report as well. There were even some observations that the borderline between the dominating strong party in power and the state had been blurred. And one important principle when it comes to democracy is that there should be a very clear distinction between the role of the party and the authority of the party and the state itself, those representing the whole society. When I started this work, I was here before, of course, sometimes as a Commissioner for Human Rights in the Council of Europe. I was informed about a great number of complaints which had come in from the citizens to the prosecutor's office, to the public defender office, and also to the Human Rights Committee in the Parliament. And of course, this was a signal that something had to be addressed. And one of the key recommendations in the report, you will see, is that each such complaint having come in must be responded to. Those who take the trouble to write down their concerns, they have the right to have a clear individual response from the authorities in charge. And I think that is important also to underpin the respect for the system of justice in the country. People should feel that they are listened to. Also, it has come across that there has been a very extensive system of surveillance in the society. And the discovery in the Ministry of Interior that there were videos of private life situations and also of conversations to a large extent is something that needs to be discussed. And I will come back to that issue. Also, when preparing the report, I tried to understand the more social situation. And as you know, human rights is not only about political and civil rights and the system of justice functioning, it is also a question of economic and social rights and the living conditions for everyone in society. And it was not difficult to see that there were problems there as well. The previous Prime Minister made a very positive gesture in the sense that he took part in a meeting organized by UNICEF in order to underline that there were problems when it comes to the rights of children. And of course, the statistics and data presented there about child poverty, about the problems when it comes to the growth of the most poor children in our society, and the standard of primary education was something that I hope will be addressed now when it comes to the follow-up of the report and in a concrete strategy for human rights, including the National Plan of Action, which will be discussed. There are two key messages in the report you will see when you look at it. One is that there is now a need to, in a systematic manner, go through the past. I've just touched on some of the problems from the past, but there is a need to address them in a systematic manner. And the other main consideration relates to how you build a system to protect against human rights violations, prevention. And the conclusion of that is that there is a need, in my opinion, humble opinion, to review the institutions in the society. Because when it comes to human rights, it is not only an issue of responding to an immediate crisis and trying to resolve the crisis. It's a question of systematic organizing of the society so that human rights will be as little likely as possible. Prevention. And therefore, there is, and that is our conclusion from the work in many parts of the world, that there is a need of a system of checks and balances. So one will secure that there is almost implanted in the administrative system aspects which would mean that problems will be addressed at an early stage. And there is a number of issues to be discussed. When it comes to the first key message about addressing the past, it's normal after a change of government that there will be a period when one looks backwards. I mentioned the many complaints which have come in which really needs a response. But I think also that there is a need for a systemic approach, a policy on how to deal with issues which have come up in this discussion. And there have been problems here in the discussion. There has been a proposal about a commission backed by a law to look at what has been called the miscarriage of justice. And that discussion has not been completed. There has been a proposal about some kind of an amnesty which would protect the people who were involved in some wrongdoings, but at the same time could be seen as really just following orders may not have been key actors when it comes to these wrongdoings. And there is a need to complete this discussion, also to be able to move forward. There is, of course, a discussion with also international participation about the cases of people from the previous regime, office holders in the past, who have been charged. Some of them are in pretrial detention, others are charged but at liberty for the moment. It is absolutely crucial that these trials are conducted in a professional manner. And the quality of the charges there, of course, are very important. And you are aware that there will be an international monitoring of these trials. And this is another test on how the system of justice really works. And there should, of course, be a possibility for those charged to have their rights met in this situation. So I believe that there is a need to have another systemic look at the past, come up with a complete, thorough approach to the past, and try not to drag it out too long, because the country needs to be brought forward and not be stuck in the past. When it comes to institution buildings, of course, a major aspect is the functioning of the system of justice. There have been a lot of discussions so far. There has been a review of the High Council of Justice. There have been elections to the non-judge posts within the system, in the council. There are 2 vacancies still, which of course should be filled as soon as possible. And the idea, of course, is to guarantee, to ensure that the independence of the justice system there, the court system, will be respected, and there should be hands-off approach from the political authorities in order to facilitate for the justice system to be absolutely independent. But it also requires a response from the High Council and from the judges themselves, that they are prepared to take that role of being competent and absolutely independent. And one of the messages which have come through from advisors from outside, including one advisor from the European Union, is that it's important that there will be a sense of individual responsibility for the individual judge. All the judges should take their own responsibility in the system and when they perform in the individual cases. That's important. There are some further discussions to be held here. There will be a need of some legal adjustments also in order to secure those principles. I am hopeful that actually the process going on now will lead to positive results, and the previous Prime Minister demonstrated very clearly that he wanted the political authorities to respect the integrity and independence of the judiciary, and that's of course positive. You have a strong office of a public defender here with quite a lot of resources, which is very positive. Now there are some changes being made which will influence the public defender's office. For instance, there will be a law on anti-discrimination in the country, and part of that legislation will be some kind of mechanisms to ensure that discrimination will not take place and to respond to problems. So there is a mechanism to be created there, and of course that mechanism will have to relate very closely to the public defender's office, so that invites for discussion. There's also within the office of the public defender a center for children's rights. I think one result of the discussions on children now, and with the cooperation and good advice from UNICEF, will be that there is a need to increase the resources for work for the rights of children, and that may also affect the situation of the public defender. There are other also institutions which come up for discussion. You have already decided on a data protection inspector And this is a very crucial institution, in fact. Many countries today in Europe have already such an office, and they have quite a lot of work to do, and not least inspired by the media reports on the surveillance activities going on and the problems when it comes to the new social media, when it comes to protecting the integrity of people. It's important that this new office will be well-resourced and that its independence will be fully respected. The report also proposes that there will be a look into how people can complain when they feel that officials in the law enforcement are behaving, police, for instance, but also prison guards and prosecutors. There is a need for a possibility and an opening for complaints when it comes to these officials. Usually these are protected by some kind of a screen of impunity, and that should not be allowed. The countries which have introduced an independent mechanism to receive and act upon complaints against those official holders, they have seen that the reputation and the credibility of the police forces, the prison guards and prosecutors, have in fact increased. So inviting and dealing seriously with complaints against such people is actually very positive for the improvement of the credibility and respect for instance, the police. And there is a beginning of a discussion on this issue, not least when our Prime Minister was Minister of Interior. And it's important that that continues, in my opinion. There was one important step taken by the Parliament in the adoption of a labor code, a new labor code. As you know, the International Labour Organization, ILO, had rather much criticism against Georgia when it comes to the rights of workers and the labor market situation when it comes to basic rights. This has now been addressed in the new labor code, but this needs to be followed up with institutional reforms. There is a need of an inspector on working conditions to whom people could turn if they are in grievance, and have a serious discussion about this. There is also in many countries an institution for mediation when it turns out that negotiations between employers and employees are difficult, that there is an atmosphere of conflict, that there will be an institution which will help in mediating problems. And in fact, this has, in those countries where it works, meant that you have had much less strikes and disruptions in the production, and therefore this institution has also helped when it comes to the economic financial matters. So that's another recommendation in the report, a serious consideration of that. Of course, with the new relationship to ILO, there will also be a need to activate the tripartite commission, this institution where employers, employees, and government representatives will have regular meetings to discuss common problems. And of course, that's strongly recommended. In most countries, Italy is famous for it, to have prosecutors who are particularly competent and trained in looking at the problems of the risk of corruption. I think also there is a need now in the current situation to have a look on the organization of the ministers themselves. What ministers are there, how they relate to one another, the role of the deputy ministers, and a number of other things needs to be discussed. We had a discussion with the Prime Minister yesterday about this, and this is, of course, an interesting aspect. In the longer run, it's also important to ensure that you have a clear concept of civil service, so that there is a distinction between those in the government administration who are appointed on the basis of their political sympathies and loyalties, but that there should be a protection of the sort of, say, ordinary civil servants, who should be professional, of course, who should also be having a safety when it comes to tenure in their offices, and who should be loyal to whoever is in power. So there shouldn't be a total change in the civil service administration because there is another result in a coming election. And to develop this spirit of impartial professional civil service, also, if possible, on a local level, is something which is very central when it comes to building democracy. Of course, the report touches on, but doesn't go very deep into, the issue of decentralization of the administration. But even there is, of course, a need to ensure that basic democratic and human rights aspects are covered. And the slight recommendation there is that when decentralization is entered into, the experience from other parts of the world is that one has to go a bit slow. Too quick changes there may disrupt rather than being of help. But the discussion on decentralization, of course, is absolutely crucial. So these are some thoughts, basically based on some experiences in other countries. My feeling was that in the present situation, a real look at the institutional reforms needed is what comes through also when it comes to the analysis of the human rights problems. And all that, hopefully, would be part of the forthcoming strategy on human rights and a plan of action, because that report really aims at giving some ideas about what ought to be discussed now in a systematic manner in the government administration, including the various ministries, in order to try to make a systematic plan on how to implement. It's very easy to have principles about human rights. The trick is to make them real and to bring them into reality. And I hope that when a plan is agreed, that it will be a working instrument, not only something that you read and put in the shelf, but really be a working instrument. And there, consultation is crucial. It's not only a thing for the deputy ministers in 5-6 ministries to agree upon. It should be the result of a process of consultation with outsiders, the various non-governmental structures, of course, with the Public Defender's Office, the data protection, the other institutions in society. So there's a feeling that we all owe this, we own this. It's a participatory approach which leads to a participatory report and will also include a real implementation. So this is the basic idea. Am I too long-winded? No. Okay. After this sort of introductory points, I wanted to mention just some other points. You really have to read the report because it's so full. I cannot summarize everything. I think I mentioned the key points when it comes to the judiciary, the separation, respect for the integrity, but also having a bit of pressure on the judicial system so that they keep up to the standards. Of course, the next immediate step is to appoint the two non-judge members of the High Council and encourage a constructive discussion there. The High Council of Justice will forever be an extremely important body in the system here. There is a need to have a discussion with the prosecutor about improving and lifting the competence in the team of prosecutors. Sensitive, but very important. There has been a tendency also in Georgia, but in many countries, unfortunately, that pre-trial detention, so you detain people, to deprive the liberty of people before the guilt is proven in due process. And it's important to settle very clearly that you don't put people in detention if there aren't very strong reasons for it. And the only reasons acceptable when it comes to pre-trial detention is when it's clearly a risk that the suspect will abscond, disappear, go to another country or so. That may be one argument. Another argument is that if there's a risk that the person will destroy evidence or put pressure on witnesses not to witness against him or her, that would be another good argument. But to make pre-trial detention sort of automatic, like a routine, is not acceptable. So there is a need to clarify the approach there, of course. When it comes to the penitentiary, the prison system, there was a conference yesterday about the health, and clearly, from my perspective, there has been radical improvements when it comes to the situation in prisons. There may still now and then be a risk that we have this kind of gang rule situation with what is called here thieves in law, where some of the inmates take control over other inmates, and there may also be a risk of violence there. Of course, it's important to keep an eye on this so that one doesn't lose control. Hopefully also Georgia could begin to think in terms of alternative punishments when it comes to imprisonment, alternatives to imprisonment. Frankly, this hasn't worked so well in quite a number of countries. There's been talk about it, but I think it's quite important to try a discussion on this because to put people in prison is usually not so productive, in fact, and could be quite destructive. And it has also, of course, quite an impact on families. Families may be in trouble already before imprisonment, and of course imprisonment for one member of the family may make the situation worse. And the basic principle should be that one should use the time people are locked up to help them to reintegrate in society, to emphasize this, so that one would minimize as much as possible the rate of recidivism, that people come back to prison. That should be the guiding star. But I would like to say that I think there is considerable progress in the penitentiary system, and that's positive. One important aspect there is juvenile justice, that young people who have gone astray and done stupid things, that they should be seen as much as victims as perpetrators, and a humane approach to them is important. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, which of course Georgia has ratified, emphasizes this very strongly, that detention of children should be as much as possible avoided. And if it's seen as absolutely necessary to protect the child or the environment, then it should be humane, should be the shortest possible period of time, and with an emphasis on reintegration in society, helping the child to come back to a normal life. The police, we have now a prime minister here who has a background as a minister of interior, which is a chance to really have a look at the police situation. There's one thing there that has come up quite clearly, and that is the methods used of the Ministry of Interior before for surveillance. I think the films that were made, even on sex life of individuals, and there are a number of such videos, of course, which were there in the ministry, now destroyed under a certain process, was a warning. It is important that we don't have this kind of KGB methods applied in our society. So there is something that is very important to really ensure that such practices will never be possible in the future. The Prime Minister, when he was minister there, he also stressed the importance of the education of the individual policemen, including on human rights. He introduced a code of ethics, which should be a guiding help for each individual policeman. Those types of efforts are important, and of course needs to continue. But they have been already, I think, of some impact. Minorities' rights. every country has a problem when it comes to minorities, and it's just a question of building a system where the interest of minorities are protected. And that goes for all types of minorities. And there is a need to work here. There is a legislation coming on anti-discrimination, which will be relevant for minorities, of course. I think religious minorities is another aspect which needs to be monitored clearly. I think the issue which was under discussion recently about the minaret, which was taken down in one village, but now put back again, was an interesting discussion, and we have to learn from that. I think it was great, very positive, that the minaret was put back again. It was a clear message, the respect for the Muslim citizens in this country. And I think this was a bit of a watershed, which of course should be protected. Georgia has made a pledge to the Council of Europe when Georgia became member of the Council of Europe, relating to one minority which was pushed out of this country during the Stalinist period, the Mansketian Turks. And their undertaking was that they would be allowed to come back and to have a decent start when it comes to their return. There have been some work in this regard, yes, but my feeling is that more could be done on this one to complete the fulfillment of that pledge to the international community and, of course, primarily to that minority. There was an unfortunate event on the 17th of May when it comes to what we call the LGBT and the demonstration there and the counter-demonstration, which was, as you know, very massive. Lessons have to be learned from this and conclusions drawn. There is an unfortunate misunderstanding spread out here in this country, but also in many other countries, that homosexuality is a form of virus, that you will be infected and therefore you change your identity. This is not the case. We are different. People are born in different ways, and we have to respect that and respect that there are minorities and they have the same right to live and to have jobs and not be discriminated as everyone else. So here I think Georgia is faced with a bit of a challenge in order to make clear what it is all about, to avoid that misunderstandings are spread, prejudice is breeded, and that people who are absolutely innocent in most cases, that they are not being victimized in this situation. And difficult, I mean, really difficult. And there have been some good examples here. I mean, the change in Poland, for instance, on this very issue, it was remarkable because the homophobic tendency there was deep, but it has changed quite a lot in recent years. So that might be a good example on how one would deal with this very difficult issue. Women's rights, you cannot write about human rights without dealing with the situation of women. Georgia is fortunate to have very strong women in many situations. It's very strong. But there are, of course, problems. You have problems with the domestic violence, and children and women, not least, are the victims of domestic violence. It's an issue which is difficult to touch because some people feel, well, this is private, this is my family, and don't touch it. But it has been recognized as a human rights problem because of its systemic nature. And it's important that this is tackled in a good manner. A couple of other problems, of course, when it comes to salary level. We know that women tend to have a lower salary for similar jobs compared to men, and that, of course, not acceptable. And likewise, the political representation. I mean, the idea that is there now is that if you have in every political assembly at least 40% of one of the two genders, then you are okay. But if you have lower than 40%, there is an implicit problem here which ought to be discussed. Children, I mentioned children. I recommended further cooperation with the excellent office of UNICEF here and addressing the kind of problems which came up at the conference in the late spring. We should not have child poverty. We should not accept the situation where some children are being brought up with less possibilities than other children. We should have an equal opportunity policy when it comes to children in our society, and that is also good investment for the future and for the economy of the country. Disabilities, depending on how you define a disability, we estimate that up to 8, 9, 10% of the population have disability. And of course, with the growing age of the society, you have more people who are in some sense disabled. There is a very interesting United Nations Convention from 2006 dealing with the rights of people with disabilities, and that includes also those with intellectual disabilities and mental health problems. Georgia has not yet ratified this convention, but do that. And do that in the spirit of discussion and self-scrutiny. It's important. And the basic idea there is that no one is at fault. It's not the problem of the individual who is disabled. The problem is that the society is not adjusted to give space for everyone in society, including those with some disabilities. Important and interesting. Finally, there are, of course, freedom issues, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of demonstration. All these are central. Some of it covered in the labor code now, and basically I think the legislation is fine on this point, but the thing is to ensure that practice is in line with the principles, and that makes it necessary to review the way that demonstrations have been handled in the past. Demonstrators should be protected, and they should have the right to make their position known without risking violence from anyone, other demonstrators or the police. And the handling of demonstrations is important. I think that the Minister of Interior is discussing this and has also made some progress. Media freedom, crucial. Journalists should be free to do their work. Hopefully they should also be ethical in the sense that there should be a self-scrutiny within in the media community to ensure that quality of reporting is protected. That's important for human rights. But one should avoid any penalizing of journalists for what they have broadcast. It's important that the ownership of the various media companies are public. And that there is nothing hidden there, because people have the right to know who is behind this media outlet, this newspaper, this radio station, etc. I think to help the media to function well, an approach of the government being open to give out documents, access to information, is one of the key principles when it comes to ensuring freedom of speech, freedom of expression in the society. So that is a list of points mentioned in this report. There are other points as well. Time didn't allow to go into everything. But a final word is that I'm very optimistic about Georgia, not only because of your success in Vilnius. You have an excellent group of non-governmental organizations here who are very much on the alert, impartial. Impartiality is crucial in human rights. Impartiality. You look at the facts as they are and come up with proposals which are relevant, and you avoid unnecessary politicization. So you have that spirit, and you have the beginning of institutions there to protect the rights of people in society. So, and I think that the international community, on your request, but only then, only if they are asked to, will be able to give assistance and share the experiences that have been made in other countries. So with this positive note, I wish you the best of luck.